Okay. You have spent a copious amount of time in your Google Drive folder, and you have spent more time than usual watching Ginny D and Matt Colville videos. You're looking for D&D advice, but you do not know which kind of advice you are looking for. You have come to me now, come to this video, clicked on this title. I have made a conclusion with 98.36 repeating, of course, percent chance of certainty that you are looking for bad D&D advice. I mean, I don't know why, but you have certainly come looking for it, and you have found it. Congratulations. I am here once again to deliver you the worst D&D advice that I could find on Reddit. And because it's Halloween, I quickly got together this costume of L from Death Note, just because this is what I had in my closet at the time. So here we are. I will be sitting like this the entire video, and no, you can't stop me. I think it's about time we start the video. The worst D&D advice I could find on Reddit, part, I think 4 now? Without further ado, let's get started. Don't let players fail. I've heard this a lot, with the idea being that success is fun, so players should always succeed. Without the actual chance of failure, you're just narrating a story where your players can't have anything go wrong, and frankly, removing a lot of the agency that I keep hearing so much about. So I don't think you should force your players into failure. We've talked a lot about how railroading into failure can feel really, really bad. Railroading in general doesn't feel great, but railroading into an outcome you don't want, well, that feels really, really bad. And yeah, it takes away players' agency, but at the same time, failure should be an option. It should be something that is possible. It should be possible for players to lose. Now, of course, a lot of DMs make it generally unlikely most of the time. It's not like every combat you have is a near TPK, or at least I think that's the way most DMs run it. That's the way I do it, at least. I don't want every combat to be super, super down to the wire, but when it comes to stuff like big boss fights or highly anticipated ambushes and stuff like that, I do want there to be some risk. I want my players to take some damage, take some hits. I want stuff to occasionally go wrong, because without things occasionally going wrong, well, the game's not going to be very fun. Now, that's not to say that you should be, like I said before, constantly stressing your players out, unless that's the type of game you want to run, but in most games you want a balance. For example, my last 2 sessions have gone like this. The first of these 2 sessions, they had a really bad combat that they lost. They had to flee, somebody died, she was revived, but it was very stressful. There was a lot of pressure in that battle. For the second session, I decided to take it easy a little bit. They're recovering, they're traveling through this dinosaur-infested jungle, and they had an easy fight with a group of trolls that I knew they would be able to win. I knew they would be able to win, but I threw the trolls at them anyway. Why? Because I wanted them to be able to vent a little bit, to have a good, easy combat after the, well, frankly, intense combat that we just had, the darkest hour combat that we just had. It's okay to also have low pressure situations, but you shouldn't eradicate all high pressure situations, all chance of failure from your campaign, because like the OP said, without failure, those successes, they're just not going to feel as sweet. Never start DMing if you haven't played before. Following that advice would literally annihilate this hobby. I actually used to say this a lot in terms of the, oh, you should play before you DM. I kind of understand that advice, but looking back on it, I do think it's very flawed. I look back on that because I did play before I DM'd, and I still was not a very good dungeon master at first, and it wasn't because I played or whatever. Playing kind of just is different from DMing. Being a player and being a DM, they are not at all the same thing, and that means that a lot of your skills that you take from being a player to a DM, they're going to be rules-based. You know, your knowledge of the rules from being a player. You'll understand how combat works, you'll understand how initiative works, you'll understand how rolling skill checks work. You could understand all of that, though, by reading the DMG. Hell, you can understand that by watching actual play shows. A lot of people absorb the rules just by observing them. And that's okay. That's perfectly valid. You don't need to play in order to DM. Does it hurt? I don't think so. I don't think it hurts at all. I still think you should get a couple one-shots in, maybe, but certainly not a requirement. I don't think you're damned to fail because you didn't play D&D before you start DMing. I think your first DM session is just going to be rough because you're new to it, and it's going to be hard. That's how all DMs start. Every DM starts with a few rough patches because you're new. It's going to take time to get good, and I don't know if playing the game beforehand makes that any better. I don't think it makes it any worse at the same time, though, so you know, it's just kind of a thing you can do if you want to. Not necessarily the worst, but do the voice always rubs me the wrong way. My monotonic stammer is basically my signature style as a DM and has never failed to engage my players. Presentation is great when it counts to your strengths, but it's no substitute for content. I mean, Stop that. I generally agree, though. I generally agree with what this guy is saying, even if I would have trouble getting into a game with someone who is pretty monotone. It really makes me less engaged when a DM isn't super excited to run. Like, if you've watched Shadow of Carconos, you know that when I'm running games, I'm really excited. I mean, I'm having a good time. Guys, D&D is what I love doing, and it shows. Not to say that I'm, like, hyperactive or anything, but I am excited. I ham it up a little bit. I do some voices because that's engaging for me. But every table is different. Doing fun voices or being really active and engaged in just the general way that you speak is not a requirement. If you are monotone and that's what your players are okay with and enjoy, then that's great. Every table is different, like we've said many times before. I just hesitated because the way I run games is so very different from that, but again, that's okay. Both styles are valid as long as players are having a good time. As long as you, the Dungeon Master, are having a good time, that's great. Even if I do love getting really engaged in just the general way I talk. If players didn't get the hints, TPK them. Decisions have consequences. I'm sure that is actually sound advice for a lot of groups, but not for a lot of other groups, mine included. Nobody would witness a TPK and say afterwards, fair, we had that coming, good job staying consistent. Okay, this is actually starting to affect my back, but I'm gonna push through. Okay, yes, this advice in particular is, yeah, it's not great. TPKs are they are extreme, and they are going to happen in some games. I think that that's okay. There's some games where it's going to be even very common. Again, that's a style of running, but it certainly isn't a requirement to run. Your game doesn't need a TPK to be good, and TPKs are not a punishment that you should throw out lightly, especially in games where players work a lot on their characters and the relationship between characters. It's gonna suck if your players just are stumbled into an ancient red dragon lair at level 5 and TPK just because of semantics. If you want your players to get some kind of hint, then you could talk to them. You could just communicate directly with them to tell them what you have a problem with or what kind of hint you want them to get. If they are not doing well in terms of combat or roleplay, telling them, hey guys, here's what you need to do to succeed is not a bad thing. I do that a lot, especially since in my games, combats can be pretty tense. If players are understanding mechanics, I will talk to them after a session to be like, hey, when you see glowing animated bits, pay attention to that because that's probably going to be important to your combat. That's something I do a fair bit. I don't TPK people because they don't notice the glowing bits on my map, because they didn't get the hint, so to speak. That explaining your rulings is bad. When I explain a ruling or hint at all, tell them why the DC is high, players will accept my answer or will at least let go of the issue for the time being. I have never heard the advice that explaining rulings is bad, but I can totally imagine people saying that now that I think about it. And yeah, I do think explaining rulings is something that you can do. If your players are confused about something, explain to them. It doesn't need to be in the game. I understand that can be immersion breaking or can break the flow, but after the game, no reason why during the after game talk shop you can't just tell your players, hey guys, here's why X thing was this way. As long as it doesn't spoil or ruin the illusion, so to speak, I think that's perfectly okay, especially since players can have that kind of confusion linger in their minds for a long time. Clearing up that confusion is not a bad thing. I think being allowed to explain why DCs were high or why players didn't succeed certain checks, why certain spells didn't work, I think that's okay, especially in a world where a lot of players try to use spells for their non-intended reason. I've heard the one lots of times where players try to use create or destroy water to just destroy the water in someone's lungs. And I think DMs should be allowed to explain why that's just not going to work, especially since there are many players who are just not going to let go of that sort of thing. We say in RPG horror stories, don't let it fester, and while a ruling that players don't understand isn't something that I would consider a horror story, it is something that should be taken care of. I thought that after running a few sessions as a new Dungeon Master, I would be able to improv a session with very little planning. Don't do this as a new DM unless you feel really confident. I keep seeing people talk about how you can improv a session and it'll go great, but those are for very, very experienced DMs. I'm pretty experienced with improving stuff. I did lots of improv acting before I did this whole D&D thing. That doesn't mean I can improv a session out of nowhere. Even now, I've got a few years of DMing experience on me now, And no, I can't improv a session out of nowhere. My worst sessions are ones that aren't properly prepped. That's not to say no one can do it. I'm sure there is somebody, some brand new dungeon master protege in the 7 billion people that live on this planet that can improv a whole session out of nowhere. I'm not one of those people, and most people aren't that guy who could just pull a session out of his ass. Because improving a session, it is hard. And even a little bit of prep can go a long way. Just a few notes. I take maximum of 2 pages of notes for my sessions. To some people, that's going to be extremely little. But for me, it's absolutely perfect. That's all I need to have great sessions. My sessions have improved immensely since I started taking notes and putting stat blocks in organized folders for the game, so I just have them ready to go. Those things are important to having a good D&D game. Sometimes I'll even have time to prep in advance, and I'll put maps into my VTT that I'm probably not going to use in the next session, but hey, I might use in sessions later down the line. It doesn't hurt to just have them ready. Not everyone needs to prep to that degree, but relying on improv can be dangerous. Dangerous might be an extreme word, but you get my point. Relying on improv can hurt your game if you're not ready, especially since D&D isn't just telling a story. There's a lot of mechanics around it, and without prepping those mechanics, a lot of people just aren't ready to run a game. Again, not to say that no one can do it, I'm just saying that I don't think you should underestimate the power of a little bit of prep. Alright, last one, because my back really hurts. Kind of niche, but I believe it is the worst. If you have a power gamer in your group, let them help everyone with their characters. This robs the players of creative control over their characters, which is all that they have. Okay, seriously, stop that. No, but I actually agree with this advice. The reason I was thinking was just because I never thought of it from that perspective. Usually what I say when people respond to me talking about power gamers, when people say, oh, you should just let the power gamer make their characters or help them with their characters. They'll all be power gamers. You don't have to worry about any sort of gap between the players. I mean, yeah, that's great, but you're ignoring half of the problem with super powerful characters. The DM now needs to build encounters around those characters, and that can be a royal pain in the ass for a lot of dungeon masters out there. Now, not to say that no dungeon masters can do it, or that power gamers are evil and terrible. I'm just saying that a lot of DMs aren't ready to run for that kind of group. And that's why during Session 0, I just straight up say, look, this is not a game where power gaming is a thing. Just try to create, a moderate, balanced character. Have a good stat spread, pick good spells, but no power gaming shenanigans because you'll probably break my game in half. I just clarify that at the top of the game. But this perspective, the perspective presented in this post, I never even thought about players not being able to have creative control over their characters and how that can be really harmful, especially for new players. Especially since this advice, the advice of just let the power gamer help them out, that is done a lot in new D&D games with new D&D players. And yeah, I mean, if I was new to the game and I just had someone else essentially forcing my character into, usually with power gaming builds, very specific builds, it can really suck. Not to say that you shouldn't help new players out. I mean, doing stuff like telling players what a good stat spread would look like, I don't think is bad. Advising players on which spells are good / which spells are bad, I don't think that's bad either. I do that a lot with new players. Not to say that I force them to do anything. I just tell them stuff like, yeah, intelligence is good for wizards, and yeah, True Strike sucks ass. Those things, I think, are simple and general enough that players still have creative control over their characters and allows them to create good characters, but not game-breaking characters. Again, I have to say this every time, doesn't mean power gaming is evil, but it can create problems for DMs who aren't ready for it. And the advice of, well, just make everyone power gamers, what's the problem? Is just not really good advice, and not really good advice that I hear way too much for what it is. Alright, and that is going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror. Again. Alright, and that's going to be today's episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips. I hope you guys enjoyed it. God, my back really hurts right now, so I'm going to end it very quickly. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Shadow over Karakonos. It's my actual play D&D podcast. We are coming up on the finale in a few weeks here, so catch up if you haven't already caught up. It's linked in the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment L to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.